topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. I'm Bill Martinez, and we are live. We got lots to talk about today. Selwyn Duke, who's a writer for the American Conservative, American Thinker, WorldNet Daily, many other print and online publications. Going to go one-on-one and lots of things to talk about. Joe Biden. I mean, the books just keep on coming, and you just wonder, okay, when is the real one with the real smoking gun? We've got iterations of accusations of his incompetency. And of course, Congress this week is going to be meeting with some of White House aides under the Biden administration to talk about the auto pen. So lots to talk there. Also, want to get into a discussion with Selwyn and get his insight on why he thinks that Mamdani won so resoundingly in New York. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? I mean, we've kind of accepted the fact that California is a different on a different planet altogether, but it's like New York is finding a whole new planet for themselves as well. Doesn't seem to make sense, but what are we missing here? Also, Selwyn recently wrote about Donald Trump being the real Black Lives Matter president. So without further ado, let's bring Selwyn Duke on. Selwyn, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Great to be with you, Bill. Always great to be with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and enlighten our audience. Now, we've got another book that's just been released about, trying to give us some insight into the Biden administration. I think that, you've also got one from, his former press secretary that is due out in the coming months. And so you wonder, okay, who's going to finally give us the goods? But, Dinesh D'Souza found out when he was in jail, he told me, he says, Bill, one thing, my big takeaway from being around the convicts is they say they never give up the con.
Yeah. No, that really is true. And, I find it to be so funny, Bill. We had that book by Jake Tapper, right, where he said he missed the story. He missed the story somehow. Now, I know you're in my boat, too, but I was talking about Biden's dementia because it was apparent in 2019. In fact, there was a rumor probably not long after that he was on an anti-dementia drug called Namenda. But you know what this reminds me of? And I know this is a reference that some of the young people might not get, but it's like from the movie Casablanca, where Captain Renault goes into that place, that gambling hall, where he gambles all the time. He's an officer, but now he's got to put on a show because his Nazi masters are going to be clamping down. And he says, I'm shocked to find out there's gambling going on in here. That's what it reminds me of. It was so obvious. Any person who is sentient and who is watching the news knew that Joe Biden was going senile, unfortunately. But of course, everyone else wanted to pretend as if the emperor was fully clothed.
Exactly. And the thing that still astounds me, okay, we have all the months and the years before, and it was quite obvious. Like you say, anybody that had a command of their senses whatsoever could see easily what was going on. And we referred to it as elder abuse, the way Biden was being drung about. But even worse yet is the Robert Hur report, Selwyn. I mean, to me, that was irrefutable. I mean, at that point, somebody should have put a bag over his head and walked him off the grounds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also think about poor Robert Hur. I mean, that guy can't win for losing, because back when he issued the report, the establishment, the left-wingers were slamming him. They were saying that he was in the tank for Trump. He was trying to hurt Biden. Now that Jake Tapper and others are disclosing what actually was the obvious truth, now you hear people on the left saying, well, he didn't do enough. It's his fault. He should have been more forthcoming. I've heard accusations like that, too. So, that poor guy is going to get it no matter what happens. But yeah, I mean, of course, look, the whole thing was ridiculous. There's no way that that should have been allowed, but it was just a major con perpetrated upon the American people. And, you know, it's disgusting because if you can have a guy like that in office, then who can't you have in office? I mean, obviously he was controlled by puppeteers behind the scenes. And I would still like to know, Bill, who were those puppeteers exactly? That would really be fascinating to find out. Barack Obama, Valerie Jarrett, was it Jill Biden? Who was it? Who was actually making the decisions? And then we know about the auto pen. Who was controlling the auto pen?
Right, exactly. Anybody but Biden, it seems. And you know, and Trump, I think, had some insight on this a bit, Selwyn, in saying that all that he had experienced and known of Biden, that he would never have gone along being of sound mind and being consistent, even though, you know, I don't know, consistency and Joe Biden seems to be a bit of an oxymoron. I get that. But still, it seemed that Biden, you know, went off the reservation in some of these areas, especially when it came to immigration, for example.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, as we know, he was a lot more, quote, conservative, at least on the surface decades ago. But, you know, who knows? I mean, he's not a principled person, so certainly I could see him changing with the times. But in this case, we know there were hard left wingers behind the scenes pulling the strings. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, it's so funny when people say, when they were trying to explain away Biden's inability to articulate himself, well, he has a stutter. He has a stutter. Well, maybe he had a stutter when he was a little kid. I have no idea, although that could be untrue too. You know, that's like Sandy Cortez saying, I'm a Bronx girl. But the truth is, you look at Biden speaking 15 years ago, because I did this, I accessed his speeches. He was great. He was a great speaker. And I know the difference. He was known as, quote, the great talker. That was one of his nicknames.
Right. No, it's just all manufactured and brought to you by the mainstream media, the social media oligarchs. They were all in on this cabal. And supposedly you had this, this group within the White House that were pulling the strings, maybe 5 or 6 people. And I thought it was interesting that I thought, like you, Valerie Jarrett was one of the first names that came to mind, even Barack Obama, because Barack Obama admitted, right, when he said if he was to have a third term, you know, his ideal would be, you know, that he'd be home in his pajamas speaking into the ear of the president, right? Yeah, absolutely. You know, let's also understand that Barack Obama is also the guy who once said about Joe Biden, quote, never underestimate Joe Biden's ability to F things up. Of course, he actually used that vulgar word. Right. That's what he reportedly said, according to sources. So, I mean, he knew that Joe Biden was not competent. Of course, once Joe Biden rose to the fore, he didn't really say anything because all these people, like you said, they're in on the con. They're all about power. That's all they care about. And it's really, really a shame because these power mongers can absolutely destroy civilization. And although we all have our flaws, Trump included, that's one thing you can say about Donald Trump. He was not a politician for most of his life, so you can't say he's necessarily a power monger. And I really think he does want to resurrect what he considers to be a better America. Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, look what's happening and look at the trajectory we're on right now. And what are we, 6 months into this presidency? Unemployment down low, inflation, got a handle on inflation. The big win with Iran in decimating their nuclear ambitions. I mean, it's just at every turn. The guy's hot. He's on fire. I mean, he goes overseas and these European leaders are, you know, all but shining his shoes and calling him daddy. Yeah, absolutely. Because they know that he's a strong man. And that's very, very important. You know, this is a rough world and you have to project strength. There's no doubt about it. When you have a senile man in office or you have someone like Barack Obama, who's obviously weak, then that sends the signal that the United States can be had. And let me tell you something else. I heard that in China during Trump's first term, they actually regarded him as a genius. They did because of the way he could manipulate things and he could advance America's best interests in a very, very clever way. So I know the left wants to think he's stupid. There's TDS all over the place, but he's a lot more respected around the world than any of these left-wing leaders. There's no doubt about that. Well, as my old mentor used to say, Bill, your charm is only as good as your bottom line. Look at Donald Trump's bottom line. It's one win after another. I mean, people were all, you know, shaking about, the the trade and tariff deals he was making. But I mean, he came in with a plan. He was giving us a vision of saying, hey, look I get this squared away. This is going to have an effect. We can, begin to buy that debt down. Let's do no tax on tips. Let's, how about, no tax on Social Security, which I was glad to see in, because they had taken it out, they modified it, and then they put it back in. So that was good news for the seniors of America that had happened. The big, beautiful bill, look at nothing coming out of Congress or DC is going to be perfect, but it moved the ball down the field, and we dealt with something we hadn't dealt with in 2 decades, called entitlements, and making people say, look, if you want to be on government subsidy, then and if you're able-bodied, then maybe you should be working.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as far as that bill goes, yes, it's way too expensive, but our government has been way too expensive for a long time. And I know some people are maybe sick of my quoting this, but I'll always say Otto von Bismarck, the German leader, said politics is, quote, the art of the possible. You have to understand that you just can't snap your fingers and do whatever you want when you're president of the United States, especially with the narrow margins we have in Congress. You have to work with these congressmen. And also, as far as the expense goes, the problem is inherent in our system, because at the end of the day, all of these representatives want to be able to bring home the bacon to their district. So they don't have a vested interest in cutting spending. That is the problem. Elon Musk, who I like, by the way, I respect him, just started a new party. I don't support that at all, because, again, we don't need another party. The problem is inherent in the system, and there might be a way of dealing with that, but we'd have to completely rework the system. It's something that I've been thinking about.
Well, I'm almost thinking, sadly, and, it's like good news, bad news. Good news is, on one sense, and it could be bad news, that Trump has turned things around. The economy is coming back. And what happens is that little has changed, in terms of, fixing our ills when we are in an area of prosperity. Those changes that are needed usually happen when things are on a downturn. And so it's like good news, bad news. Good news is, okay, Trump's in the White House. Things are looking up. Price of eggs is coming. We can eat eggs again, which is good. But the problem is some of these issues that Doge had pointed out, which Open the Books for decades has been pointing out, going back to the Coburn era. And he's been pointing out all this efficiency, and he brought receipts, but they didn't want to hear it, And even if you remember, H.W. Bush went in and tried to address some entitlements, and Congress all but tarred and feathered him. And this is after he came off a huge victory for re-election, right? His ratings were all up high, and you think, okay, they mugged him and said, get out of here, go have a cup of coffee. We don't want to talk to you. But it's just, I think that for us to really deal with some of these items, Selwyn, sorry to say, is that we may have to, we're probably already bankrupt. We haven't just really admitted it. But I mean, we may have to deal with some real bankruptcy type issues where, like in most companies, when they deal with bankruptcy, that's when they start getting rid of the family members, that have been in the company, getting paid an unbalanced amount of money. But hey, they're family. They got to be there. Well, now you got to save the company. So now you got to cut everything out there. And even if it is your wife's favorite grandson or whatever, you got to make those tough cuts. And until we get to that point, we're going to continue on. And the only thing we can almost hope for is that Trump was right with these tariffs, that maybe that money, and I'm saying, I want to keep an eye on that money. Any money that we generate from tariffs, is it going to go to pay down the debt? Is there going to be some specific dollars going there? Now, some will argue, say, well, Bill, Selwyn, if we're putting that money into something else, that means less money than we're grabbing. No, we still got to fix the problem. I'm with you.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's interesting. Bill O'Reilly, the pundit, he had a very good idea. He said we could allow drilling on federal lands, drilling for oil and natural gas, and then use the profits that the feds would derive from that to pay down the debt. That would help. But, if you want to illustrate the problem, okay, really this little story does it. I remember years ago, the late economics professor, Walter Williams, a great man, related this story when he was on the radio once. Now, he was a big libertarian economist, and he said he was having lunch with Jesse Helms, who was a senator back then from the Carolinas, North Carolina, I believe, big tobacco growing state. And he was telling Helms about how bad tobacco subsidies were. And he was going on about it. He was expounding upon the issue, and Helms listened politely. And then when Williams was done, Helms looked at him and said, well, Walter, I agree with you, but here's the problem. If I come out against tobacco subsidies, I'm going to lose re-election, and I'm going to be replaced by someone who's even worse.
Yes.
That's what he said. Now, you might say that's a very, very convenient point of view, and maybe it is, but it also happens to be absolutely true, because that's the system we have. And we're stuck in that Tytler cycle. Alexander Tytler, he was a Scotsman. I know you've seen this quotation. I can't give it to you verbatim, but he basically said that a democracy, quote unquote, can only exist until people expend the treasury, because what happens is that people realize they can vote themselves largesse from the treasury.
Exactly.
And then, of course, the fiscal situation becomes worse and worse until you experience fiscal collapse. And then he said, what happens then is that the democracy is always succeeded by a dictatorship. That's what he said. So unfortunately, we are in that cycle.
Yeah, and it seemed like, gosh, last year especially, Selwyn, we were close. And then here we are, and you see what happens in New York with Mamdani. I mean, he's got these kids. He's like the Pied Piper, and he's got these kids following behind him, and like these kids that are on these college campuses yelling from the river to the sea. I especially am charmed by some of these kids that profess to be gay, chanting from the river to the sea. Little do they know what would happen to them if they got the river to the sea.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you know what they say, useful idiots, and Mamdani is just a true Pied Piper, as you just said. I wrote about him just recently, and one reason why he's so dangerous, Bill, is that he's so darn charismatic. I hadn't really seen this fellow on TV until recently, but then I did, and I said, yep, now I know why he prevailed in that Democratic primary. Remember, this guy was at 1% in the polls 5 months ago. He was an also-ran. Then he ended up beating Cuomo by a wide margin. They didn't even have to really go to the ranked choice voting calculations. He beat him on the first calculation, which wasn't expected, wasn't predicted even by the polls. Exactly. And my point here is this, charisma is so important in politics, unfortunately. Studies have shown that in an election, the more charismatic candidate virtually always wins, assuming they both get decent exposure. And if you look at history, you can see that. You go back to 76, you had Ford and Carter. Carter was more charismatic. 80, Reagan was more charismatic than Carter. He won. Reagan was more charismatic than Mondale in 84. And I don't want to bore you with the whole lineup, but you can go to Clinton, G.H.W. Bush in 1992, and Dole in 1996. He was more charismatic than they were. And that's how it is with Mamdani. He's got a great smile. He has a lot of charm, but unfortunately, that makes him dangerous, because you have to remember, many people, most people, I would say, do not vote on the basis of logic and reason and knowledge. They vote on an emotional basis. And that's all they see very often is the packaging. And you can stop me if I'm going on too long.
No, you're exactly right, because I saw this early on with Bill Clinton, for example. His handlers, I think, what's his name out of Louisiana, said that he admitted that they didn't expect Clinton to win the first time around, because he had all this sexual harassment baggage that he was dragging behind him. And it was just that, and I think HW got tired and kind of surrendered. Of course, it didn't help either that H. Ross Perot splintered the vote as well. But yes, Clinton was very, very charming, and he was able to get around all that stuff. Amazing. Barack Obama, the same way. Barack Obama, I mean, I talked to several people who did an incredible amount of research and vetting, unlike our mainstream media, on Barack Obama's origination, and even going back to the controversial birth certificate. They even went so far, Selwyn, they found the birth certificate that Barack Obama had lifted the information on and manipulated a new birth certificate for himself. I mean, it was quite revealing. But Barack Obama, because of his charm and the desire for the American people, thinking, maybe if we elect this black president, we can get all this racial stuff behind us once and for all. I think that was a big motivator. I don't know, but I agree with you that charm. It reminds me of my old mentor. He used to tell me all the time, said, Bill, your charm is only as good as your bottom line, and that, of course, that has to do with business. In business, you got to have a bottom line. Charm will get you through the door, may get you a meeting, but can you deliver the goods? And unfortunately, in politics, it gets you through the door, and once you're in the door, you get the auto pen and you get to stay there for a while.
Yeah, well, in politics, unfortunately, Bill, charm is the bottom line. There was another study many years ago that found that if people express themselves well, if they say something well, they will sway others no matter what it is that they're selling. And, you look at Mamdani, getting back to him. I mean,
Right.
Here's a guy who is a full-blown communist, it seems. And no, that's not a radical statement. He was actually seen in a video that emerged recently from 2021 talking to a socialist group. And he said one of their goals, he said this very casually, was, quote, the seizure of the means of production. The seizure of the means of production. Now, I did a little research. As far as I can tell, this video is absolutely valid. It's authentic. It's not AI. Now, if you're saying something like that, you're just a full-blown Marxist. You're like Mao Zedong or Joseph Stalin. And that means this guy may have a nice smile. He may be beautiful externally, but he could be a malevolent creature on the inside. And he is definitely someone we should be wary of, Bill.
Yeah, and like you said, how many other world leaders going back in history had the charm, for the moment in time, and then what happened? It did not turn out anywhere close to what they expected. They lost their liberties. They're under control. They got a boot on their throats, and they're suffering. And then we're back to which is a condition of the isms, shared misery, right?
Right. Well, absolutely. And, it's interesting because many years ago, I actually wrote a poem titled The Charmer about this very thing. But, it's just unbelievable when you look at what's going on here with this fellow Mamdani. I mean, we know that this does not work, socialism. And when you're talking about seizing the means of production, well, that absolutely would be disastrous. No, this is just insane. But, it's interesting because I'll illustrate how little many people know. About 25 years ago, Bill, I was teaching religious education, and I was working one-on-one with this 14-year-old boy in my area, and I live in a suburb. Anyway, so when I was trying to make certain points, I used Adolf Hitler as an example of evil incarnate. Well, after a few weeks, you know what the kid asked me, 14 years old? Who's Adolf Hitler? He had no idea. And this was about 25 years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a second now. If you don't know who Adolf Hitler is, what do you know about history that's of substance? And this really is a testimonial as to how terrible our education is nowadays. But again, it also illustrates, Bill, how there are many people out there who don't know anything about what really matters. Politics, civics, history. Okay, so again, they're voting on emotional bases. And this is why the founding fathers stressed that if you want to be free, you have to have an educated electorate. It is imperative. And more importantly, you have to have an electorate that has virtue in it. The founding fathers stressed that. And of course, if they are virtuous, they will educate themselves because that's an aspect of virtue. Diligence is a virtue. If you're diligent, you make sure you cross all the T's and dot all the I's. You make sure you're conversant with the issues before casting that vote.
Exactly. And the key idea was that in order for us to manage this humongous opportunity and a great American idea, it really was built on self-rule. And in order to have self-rule, you had to have all these elements, like you said, an educated constituency, people that just didn't, have their heels up on the desk, and because that had already been tried. Because even as our in our early foundings, the Pilgrims came across and thought, okay, we'll approach this in a socialistic sort of manner, and they found out within a year that didn't work, right?
Right. Well, absolutely. I mean, socialism, actually, the ideas that underpin it were born long, long before the Communist Manifesto was written. That was published in 1848. By the way, I understand that they initially wanted to name it the Socialist Manifesto, but they didn't do that because the term socialism had already been discredited at the time because it was associated with so many wackos, so many bizarre people. But if you look at history, we have more than 150 years of socialist failure to look back on. Just take Robert Owen, the Scottish, quote, reformer, and his little commune, New Harmony, in Indiana. In 1826, he set up this commune. Now, he was probably, Bill, inspired by all of the religious communes that existed at the time, some of which were very successful. So he sets up this socialist-like commune where basically it is from each according to his abilities and to each according to his needs, supposedly. Well, you know how long it lasted? It lasted 2 years, and then it started dissolving. Why? Because if you read the history of it, they will say it attracted layabouts, it attracted irresponsible people. And that was on a very, very small scale, by the way, okay? Right. It didn't even work there. You think that this is going to work on a national scale? Never has, never will. And if you want to destroy wealth, that is the way to do it. Remember, 2013, Think Progress left-wing site actually confessed that we were living in the most prosperous age worldwide in human history. Now, why is that? That is because of the Industrial Revolution and the spread of healthy market systems which create wealth. They are wealth creation engines. That's why. You kill that golden goose, forget about it. We're going to see poverty like you can't imagine with having more than 8 billion people on the earth.
You imagine poverty, depression, suicide rate, violence, lawlessness. It all goes down the proverbial toilet because, you know, one of the higher levels of our existence is to have that ability to be productive, Selwyn. We want to be able to feel at the end of the day we've earned our wage for the most part. Okay. Are there exceptions? I get that. But the heartbeat of America and the magnet that draws people here is that you can be productive. You can be the captain of your own ship. And, with some government interference, I'm not saying everything's perfect, but we're working on that. But nonetheless, I mean, compared to anybody else in the world, I mean, it's a pretty good idea here.
Yeah, well, it absolutely is. And like I said, see, part of the problem here is perspective. People don't have things in perspective. They always see the glass, too many of the young people especially, as half empty when it's way more than half full. And, as Milton Friedman, the famed late economist, pointed out, you have to realize that the norm for mankind was to live in grinding poverty. I read once that the average lifespan during the Roman Empire was 22. I read that it was in ancient Greece, 35. Now, these are approximations, but the point is that on average, if you factor in infant mortality and childhood deaths from disease, people didn't live very long. If you look at ancient Spartan boys in their military camps, they subsisted off blood soup, which probably isn't as bad as it sounds, but they were hungry all the time. And they were, I think, even expected to steal to try to supplement their diets. So the point is, and by the way, the average Spartan hoplite warrior was only about 5'5", 135 pounds. Right. That's not portrayed in entertainment. And that's probably largely because of their diet. And by the way, they had it good compared to many people in this world. I mean, there are so many people who've lived in dire poverty and who died of starvation. We still see this in Africa today when they were very, very young. And again, it's only free market systems, those wealth creation engines, that ended all that. As Milton Friedman put it, they catalyze the creative capacities of the modern man because they give you an incentive to create wealth, to take the things you find on and in this earth and combine them in ways so that you become innovative, you invent new things in ways that enhance human existence. And all of our modern science, all of our modern luxuries, everything we enjoy, the computer we're communicating through right now, all these things are attributable to that.
Yeah, exactly. Not by former vice president. I'm sorry to tell you, Al Gore did not. But his dream lives on. his dream lives on. But that's okay. We'll pretend. But but you're exactly right. And the thing is that Mamdani and his ilk would want us to be creative and still productive, but he wants to come in and steal what you've created, and he'll steal from you all your productivity until you finally just give up. And then what's life worth living for then? I mean, this is why these type of programs are short-lived, and they're very painful. And here it is, our country was so close to surrendering that. You imagine if Kamala Harris would have been elected over Donald Trump this time around, where do you think we'd be at this point?
Oh, well, it would just be awful. I mean, the woman's incompetent. Who knows how she would be manipulated by left wingers? And let's understand something, Bill. Trump won, and we're saying, well, he won the popular vote and the Electoral College, of course. But if you look at many states in which he won, it was really a very narrow margin. And that should scare people. And I know there was a lot of vote fraud, too. Let's be honest about it. Yeah. I think in this case, though, the election was just too big to rig. But yes, these socialists would destroy us. And you take Mamdani, the problem he has is that he wants things like a $30 minimum wage, which, by the way, would devastate little bodegas in New York City. What are they going to do with that? He wants free buses. He wants so many things that are going to be free. How are you going to pay for this? He wants to tax millionaires more highly. Now, here's the problem he has, Bill. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he's going to be able to erect a Berlin Wall around New York City to keep people in, which is what the Marxists did during the Cold War. And what that means is you're going to see a flight of capital, of rich people from New York City like you haven't seen before. And I've heard some left-wingers say, well, nobody leaves New York. Really? I left New York City decades ago, and I'm not going back on a bet. I say to people, if I never saw it again, it would be too soon. Okay.
Right. Well,
and I know
what's the occupancy rate right now in New York? I mean, how many apartments are empty, which has been unheard of for many years. And yes, there's been such a flight out of there. I'm in Florida, and we warn Floridians not to stand close to the exit doors or the entrances because people from New York are flooding down here. You're going to get run over.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So he could really destroy New York, which is one of the financial capitals of the world. I mean, it's terrible. But again, the man is so charismatic. He's the favorite right now. He's leading in the polls. I wouldn't want to bet against him. And I'm just glad I don't live in New York City anymore.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I was looking at some recent polls here. I mean, to your point, Mamdani got 41% of the vote, Cuomo 26%, Eric Adams 16%, Curtis Sliwa less than 10%. You got 51% of New Yorkers saying they would never vote for Adams. Okay, 51%. 46% say they would never vote for Mamdani. So you got what, a 5% spread there that'll probably be chewed up if Cuomo does go independent and Sliwa chips off some of that stuff as well. Yeah, I mean, the stars look like they're aligned for this guy.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, he actually has me rooting for Eric Adams, and I never thought that could happen before. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, I know how you feel. And Eric and Curtis Lee was a great guy. He's a nice guy, and all that he's tried to do, and in protecting New York, he's gotten beat up. I mean, they busted his ribs up and stuff. I mean, the poor guy. But he's gonna exacerbate the problem, because he's not going to get enough votes to overcome. I mean, to be where he's at, he's going to be a spoiler. So I think they need to get together somehow and talk strategically as to what they can do. But yeah, I find myself, it is ironic to sit there and go, yeah, Eric Adams is the best option right now, but we'll see how that plays out. I did want to talk to you about another thing that you recently wrote about, and that is that Donald Trump has become the real Black Lives Matter president, right?
Yeah, he certainly has. And well, I say that is something most people don't know about, but Donald Trump recently brokered a peace between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. Now, people might say, Duke, what are you talking about? Well, this is one of those wars that you don't hear about, but it's been going on for decades, conflict between them, different wars I'm talking about, and it's cost millions of lives. We hear about Ukraine, we hear about what's happening with Israel and the Palestinians. We don't hear about things like this. And like I said, Trump just brokered a peace. So if this peace holds, and we don't know if it will, human nature being what it is, but if it does, Trump will have saved innumerable Black lives. And this is where the rubber hits the road, because you look at all these other people on the left, they say, oh, I support Black Lives Matter, which we know the organization is a complete fraud now. But the truth is, their policies cost Black lives. And by the way, just talking about that, that's another area where Trump actually has done things beneficial for the Black community, because when you allow crime to proliferate, which the left wing has done, no cash bail, it's slap on the wrist, so-called justice, in New York City and Philadelphia, other places, what happens is more minority people, Black people die because a plurality of crime, I would say, is
Right.
Black on Black. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
that's where the crime is, in these Black communities. So when you see depolicing, like you saw in the wake of the George Floyd riots, where the police are afraid to do their duties, what happens is more Black people die, more Black people get hurt, innocent Black Americans. And Trump does something about that, or at least he tries to, because he's a law and order president. The left does not, because the left is facilitating criminality. That's what it's doing. It's very, very evil. And as is always the case with these people, when they accuse you of something like not caring about Black Americans, it's because they are projecting their mindset onto you. They're accusing you of what they're guilty of themselves.
How come we can't get legitimate numbers on that you just mentioned? I mean, I know some of this is anecdotal. Dr. John Lott, who's a researcher, has come up with numbers and talking about law enforcement, the way they jury rig the numbers, and they've really manipulated them in such a way. But yet we're still looking for data that is legitimate, that reinforces exactly what you just said. And that is, in these minority communities where lawlessness takes over, you defund police, and then look at the rate of of crime and murder and everything else.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. This is what's been happening in these communities for a very, very long time now. And you mentioned the numbers, Bill. Well, I remember some years ago, I don't know if this is still the case, but you had major cities that were not reporting their crime stats to the FBI. So when the left-wing media would say, well, crime is down or crime is not up that much, the truth is they had huge holes in the data there. I mean, it was completely invalid, the claim. And the truth is when you have depolicing, this was a problem in Baltimore some years ago, probably still is, where the police just stop arresting criminals and the DAs, they stop prosecuting criminals. Well, of course, then the crime rate is going to appear to go down, but it's simply because you're not arresting the criminals. That's also, like you said, getting the real numbers can be very, very difficult. It's smoke and mirrors. Well,
if you remember the mayor of Baltimore, just let them riot. They need to get this out of their system. What? I mean,
that was Stephanie Lake. Yeah, she said space to destroy. That's how she put it. People who needed space to destroy, they were going to give them room to do that. I mean, it was just unbelievable. This is the mentality we have here. It's crazy. That's what Mamdani would bring to New York City.
Right. On steroids. I mean, we just open all that up and look what happened. I mean, just some minor law enforcement that Donald Trump with the National Guard employed in Los Angeles. Selwyn, if he didn't do that, LA could still be burning. You know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And they made these
riots
issues, the looting. I mean, they put the stop to the looting right away. I mean, they got away with it for the first couple nights. And, Karen Bass didn't seem to be too concerned about that. They could take up to $1,000, not a problem, until the feds came in and said, no, federal law is different. I don't care. You take a piece of gum, you're going to go to jail. We're going to come after you.
Well, absolutely. Listen, it's a basic function of the government to ensure domestic tranquility. If the government does not perform that role, and if it doesn't secure our borders, it has no right to exist, no moral right at all. These are basic functions. It's not a basic function to facilitate the so-called sex changes of children. It's not a basic function to impose DEI, which is poison, and it's just officially sanctioned discrimination. None of these things are basic functions, but taking care of crime is. And a politician who doesn't resolve to do that shouldn't be elected dog catcher.
Exactly. Well, speaking of charmers, let's go to, of course, the top Bronx girl herself, AOC. You write she's more suburban socialist than Bronx Bolshevik.
Yeah. Here's another one. Now, by the way, you're actually looking at a real Bronx boy. I know you can't tell from the way I speak. You know what I'm telling you, Bill? Bada bing, bada boom.
Gotcha, bada boom.
But believe it or not, I was born in Yonkers, which is a city that abuts the Bronx. And then my parents lived in the Bronx at the time. And I lived there for the first 28 years of my life, actually. Now, I live in Westchester currently, which is where AOC, Sandy Cortez of Green Leafy Westchester, as I like to call her, actually grew up. She only lived in the Bronx until she was 5 years old. Then her parents took her up to Yorktown Heights, which is a Tony town, a very, very nice town.
Oh, yeah.
So she's a suburban girl. And I've been to Yorktown Heights. Very, very nice place, but you're not going to find the hood there. You're not going to find the Crips or the Bloods there. But you did find Sandy Cortez there. And if she was taken out of the Bronx when she was a little 5-year-old, that means she doesn't even really remember her time there. And I'm sure she visited relatives there. I know that. But she's not a Bronx girl. But you know what she is? She's another one like Mamdani. She is someone who actually does have charisma. Now, people on my side, they're going to say, wait a second, what are you talking about? I can't stand the woman. You've got to change your mentality. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's not conversant with the issues, who doesn't know anything about ideology, doesn't know civics, who just listens to her. You're going to see someone who's very fluent, who can present things well, as one of her high school teachers said, best presenter he ever saw. And you know, it's no coincidence, because you know how she was chosen? She was chosen by the Justice Democrats, a far left-wing group. They're socialists, via what essentially was an audition. Wow. Yeah. That's how she got there. And, you know, here's the thing. You may find this interesting. This occurred to me when I was writing my article about Mamdani. But, you know, in sports nowadays, you see the competition bill is tougher than ever. You know, the records now are unbelievable. In the mid-50s, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. Everyone thought that couldn't be done. Now the boys' high school record is 3:53 and change. Now, my point here is that I think the competition for charm in the charisma department in politics has followed the same path. And I think that's because of social media, because of the internet.
Yes, right.
You go back to the time before radio, it didn't matter nearly as much because people usually didn't see the candidates. Maybe they read about them in a newspaper, so they might focus on what was told to them in that paper about the candidates' positions. Then you had the radio, you could hear them, but still it wasn't like the television age. Then you had the television age, and you had the first televised debate in 1960, presidential debate between JFK and Richard Nixon. And what happened there? What happened there was that people who only heard it on the radio thought Nixon won, but people who watched it on TV thought JFK won. Yes. Why? Because he was younger, better looking. Nixon had that 5 o'clock shadow, and JFK
was sweating.
Right. And now we have the internet age with social media and podcasts, and now you have television on steroids. So I think it's a situation where, as in sports, you just have to be uber charismatic nowadays. I don't like that fact because I don't vote on that basis, but I just think that's the way it is. And that's why I said in my article about Mamdani, I think Republicans have to realize now when they're nominating people that you've got to ask this question. Would this person be able to successfully carry a podcast? Because if the answer is no, if he can't do that, maybe he can't carry the election in this age of big time media.
Well, I think that was the question that was asked of Cuomo here, right? He meets with a donor. And the donor says, this guy doesn't have the passion. He couldn't do a podcast. And so he says, I'm not backing him. So he decides to put, his chips on Adams. But going into the meeting, to your exact point, he was going to cut a big check for Andrew Cuomo.
Right. Well, I think that's a very good example, because if you look at Andrew Cuomo, he's a lot more charismatic than many. If you remember him during COVID, he completely mismanaged it, but he would sit there and he was being revered for a while, in that outfit he had that was dark. It almost looked fascistic to me, but he was giving these news conferences and telling these stories about his mother. And he's such a good raconteur, and he had people mesmerized, transfixed. And so he's not even bad in that department. But again, harking back to what I said about the competition, he still pales in comparison to Mamdani, who not only has more charisma, but you mentioned this, he says what he says with passion. He really seems to believe in it. So maybe he's sincerely wrong, but I guess maybe he is sincere. I don't know.
Well, and I think you're right, sincerely wrong, because we know that history and the evidence, the math won't back up. I mean, he wants Mamdani, going back to Mamdani again. He thinks that he's going to generate all the money that he needs, for free buses, free bus rides, city-supported bodegas and grocery stores. Are you kidding me? And he's going to tax the uber wealthy. I mean, whoever stays in town, even if you stopped it right now and said, hey, run the math on the numbers right now in the the uber wealthy, how much money are we talking about?
Yeah, well, exactly. You're dealing with a fluid situation. I mean, you can't view it in a static way where you raise taxes, everything else stays the same, so you generate more revenue. It just doesn't work that way. If you institute a law, what happens is people change their behavior. It may seem unrelated, but this is an example of what I'm talking about. In 2021, New Jersey enacted a single-use plastic bag ban because they were saying we wanted to save on plastic because it's bad for the environment. You know what happened? Plastic use for plastic bags increased 300%. Why? Because people had to use these so-called reusable bags, which require 15 times as much plastic, but people don't use them on average 15 times as much. So again, that's an example of how you can't have people in government who have these big egos and who think they can micromanage things from the top, because it just does not work. As Thomas Sowell has pointed out, most all of us have expertise in only a very narrow range of endeavor. And the truth is, you have to understand that if you're in government, you have to have humility. You have to understand that for the most part, you have to rely on the invisible hand of the market to orchestrate things, because it generally does not go wrong. Occasionally, but not generally. Much better than having some oligarchy of socialists, of pseudo elites trying to control things from the top down.
Well, I guess in some sense, we're fortunate that we have 4 recent years to use as a comparative, and the government was involved in everything, down to the light bulb that you screwed into your lamp. How well did that work out for you?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, this is the problem. And a lot of well-meaning people don't get it. I just gave you the example of the plastic bags in New Jersey. You could have the best intentions in the world, but the reality is that none of us know enough to orchestrate an entire economy from the top down. Here's another example. According to Walter Williams, the average supermarket stocks 15,000 items. Now, these are from the world over. And if you're going to know what you should stock, what you should discontinue, what you should introduce, how much of each product, you have to be someone who's an expert in that area and who's on the ground there in the supermarket looking at sales. Do you think some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. could even come close to doing that job? And it's not just that supermarket. Multiply that by 10,000, because it's supermarkets everywhere. It's other businesses of all different kinds, other entities. I mean, it's just impossible. This whole situation is so complex that you might say, if you're a futurist, a technocrat, well, maybe AI will be able to do it. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to bank on that either, because that's also a very risky proposition. You have to rely on the market, because, Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's absolutely the worst system in the world, except for all the rest. And what is the market? The market is economic democracy. Every time we make a purchase or retain a service, we're casting a vote within the context of the system. Exactly. We're deciding what products and services will prevail. And you can say the same thing about the free market that you could say about democracy. It's absolutely the worst system in the world, except for all the rest.
But, you think about it, Selwyn, the cumulative intelligence of 350 billion? Are we 350 billion? No, we're 350 million.
343. 343.
Yeah. So here we are, the cumulative intelligence of our population. And, and you want to just take that out of the mix. I mean, I think that we saw what happened with COVID, for example. You didn't want to listen to what was happening on the ground. You wanted to talk from on high and your ivory towers, and you end up killing a lot of people unnecessarily when we had the not necessarily vaccines, but we had the medicine that could have solved the problem. And of course, we're finding this out, 5 years down the road after, millions of people have died.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, what did Reagan say? The 9 scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It really is true. And again, we need some government. We understand that. We're not anarchists, but you can't have the government getting involved in too many things. And let me tell you what governs this. I know we don't have a lot of time.
We got about a minute. I'll tell you what, let's do this. We got about a minute left. I'm going to let you summarize it and bring us home. Go ahead.
Okay, the principle is called subsidiarity. Now, what that means is that if a task has to be performed in society, the smallest possible unit of society that can possibly perform that task should be the one to do so. So if it's something the family can do, then you don't outsource that to a larger entity like a community organization. If the family can't, you don't go straight to the federal government. You go to that community organization or the local government. If it can't do it, you go to the state. But that's the principle that governs this, subsidiarity. People like these left-wingers, Mamdani, Sandy Cortez, they want to go right to the feds with everything. That is a recipe for disaster. We saw that with the Soviet Union. It does not work. That way lies madness.
What hubris that they think they know better, right? And look at the proof that they show us. They show us time and again they don't. And we're caught in this trap, as Elvis Presley would say. But we'll leave it there. Selwyn Duke, you're awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. Selwyn Duke is the writer for The New American, The Hill, Observer, The American Conservative, WorldNet Daily, American Thinker, and many other print and online publications. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate the insight.
God bless, Bill. Thank you.
Take care. God bless. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Well, I'll tell you, Selwyn brought a lot to the front here, and I'm sure has given you a lot to think about. And I pray that you were blessed by this. Thank you so much again for sharing some time with us and with Selwyn Duke. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. God bless.